Last night, I turned on this Japanese drama, Jin. I went in with a very specific modern mindset.
Yeah.
I was ready for a history lesson, maybe some high-stakes samurai action, or just something to pass the time. I was looking for entertainment, looking for content.
The way we all do.
Exactly. But about halfway through, the experience completely shifted. The frantic pace of my own thoughts just kind of fell away, replaced by this quiet, deliberate rhythm of the Edo period on screen. I wasn't just watching a show anymore. I felt like I was witnessing a completely different way of existing. And then this character, a 19th century physician named Ogata-kun, said something that just, it stopped me dead in my tracks.
Oh.
He didn't talk about saving the world or acquiring wealth or defeating enemies. He just said, the way is to live in a manner that brings no shame to your own conscience.
Yep.
And that one quiet sentence hit me with a force I was not prepared for. It wasn't just a line in a script. It felt like a ghost passing through the room. It actually triggered this visceral realization about my own lineage. My ancestors were Bushi, warriors who lived by a code that had nothing to do with the achievements or metrics we obsess over today.
Right.
It made me realize that while we're so busy asking, how well can I do this? We've completely forgotten the far more important question. With what attitude am I facing this?
That phrase, the way of conscience, it cuts right to the core tension we're facing globally and specifically, I think, within Japanese culture.
Yeah.
You've perfectly captured the philosophical divide. Modern corporate life and even personal life, it demands external validation, sales figures, rankings, profit margins. We measure success by doing well.
By the numbers.
By the numbers. But historically, the Japanese moral system, often encapsulated in this idea of michi, or a way, focused on being well on cultivating an inner posture of sincerity and moral integrity, regardless of the immediate measurable outcome. It's the moral methodology that matters.
It's the attitude. The sincerity, the dignity of the effort itself, almost completely divorced from the final measurable result. But in a globalized world of quarterly reports and SEO rankings, how does that inner posture, that sense of conscience, how does it actually survive, let alone thrive?
And that, I think, is our deep dive mission today. We need to explore how this profound philosophical emphasis on inner conscience, which has roots stretching back centuries in codes like Bushido and the concepts of Michi, how it actually translates when it gets slammed into the demands of contemporary globalized Japanese corporate governance, modern education systems, and, the relentless pressure of competing in a world obsessed with quantifiable external achievements.
It's a collision.
It's a fascinating study in cultural integration and, inevitable collision.
Okay, so let's unpack this foundational philosophy first. When most people hear Bushido, they immediately think of swords and, harsh discipline. But based on what I've been reading, it was much broader. And the focus of their education system was, it was highly specific.
Yes, that cinematic view is just far too narrow. Bushido, the way of the warrior, as scholars like Netobi explained, it wasn't codified overnight. It wasn't some rule book.
Right.
It was spontaneously developed as a way of life for the samurai class over hundreds of years, roughly coinciding with the Kamakura era starting in the 12th century. And it became a general moral system that influenced the entire Japanese population for centuries, governing how people interacted, how they valued things, and crucially, what they prioritized in education.
And crucially, the primary goal of samurai education wasn't intellectual agility, which is what we prioritize now, testing, memorizing, critical thinking.
Not at all. The foremost point in samurai education was character building.
Character building.
They intentionally left subtler faculties like, say, prudence, intelligence, and dialectics in a minor position. They weren't looking for intellectual ornament or delight. They were looking for ability used in judgment and the disposition of business moral ability.
So, practical wisdom.
Practical moral wisdom. The guiding philosophy was something like, learning without thought is labor lost. Thought without learning is perilous. The emphasis was on integrated character, where knowledge always served a moral purpose.
This inherent focus on character over pure intellect, it also leads to a remarkable contrast when we look at how they valued certain services, especially education itself. We live in a world where everything is monetized, but the sources I saw point to spiritual service being considered quite literally priceless.
It did. And here's where it gets really interesting in contrast to modern systems of compensation. Bushido adhered to this profound idea that spiritual service, the service of a teacher, a mentor, a pastor, was considered invaluable.
Invaluable.
It simply could not, and therefore should not, be repaid in silver or gold. Because the best service done in education or in soul development is immeasurable. Money is considered an inadequate and, frankly, a vulgar measure of its value.
That distinction has enormous implications. If you can't quantify the value of the teacher's effort, then the teacher must be motivated by something purer than monetary reward sincerity, right?
Exactly.
This makes us question our entire system today, where we often financially undervalue essential jobs like teaching or nursing or nonprofit work, precisely because their value is so hard to measure on a spreadsheet.
That's it exactly. The code demanded that your motivation be internal, driven by duty and conscience, not external, driven by profit. And this focus is reflected in the specific core virtues that the samurai cultivated. Let's look closer at those virtues that emphasized moral alignment over just success or mere survival. Take courage, for example.
Courage is the most basic warrior virtue, but under Bushido, it had a moral prerequisite. It wasn't just being brave.
No. Courage, or the spirit of daring, was viewed with a really important caveat. Nitobi explains that courage was scarcely deemed worthy to be counted among virtues unless it was exercised in the cause of righteousness.
So it's not bravery for bravery's sake.
Not at all. If a coward ran from a moral duty, they were disgraced. But if a brave man fought for greed or injustice, they were equally disgraced. The fight had to be for justice. Furthermore, valor demanded respect for the opponent. You should own as enemies in war only those who prove worthy of being friends in peace.
That's a profound ethical restraint. The fight is for justice, not hatred driven by materialism or personal gain. It elevates the conflict itself into a kind of spiritual act. But if courage needed righteousness, what did they consider the highest spiritual act?
The supreme virtue was benevolence.
Benevolence.
This meant the feeling of distress for others, recognizing it as a princely virtue. Love, magnanimity, affection for others, sympathy, and pity were recognized as the highest attributes of the human soul. The concept of jin benevolence, or compassion, was essential because without it, the samurai strength was purely destructive. Benevolence was the moral safety lock on power.
And then we have politeness and honor, which seem tied directly to that concept of inner posture, how you project that cultivated character into the external world.
Politeness, in fact, is sometimes called the prince of virtues, and it relates so closely to sincerity. True politeness isn't just following rules, it's the external manifestation of internal respect and sincerity.
I see.
And honor, on the other hand, is derived from contentment with what God has ordained and acceptance of what the Lord has bestowed. A person's true glory lies in their knowledge, upright conduct, and wisdom, not in their rank, their wealth, or their nationality.
Which universalizes the ethical code.
Absolutely. Whether you are a samurai or, crucially, a tradesman, your ethical conduct determines your value.
So we have this deep historical framework prioritizing sincerity, character, and dignity. But this was the code for the warrior class. How did this philosophical concept of Michi the Way, how did it survive the end of feudalism and transition into the commercial realm? The realm of the merchant, where profit is, by its very nature, the primary metric of success.
This is the crucial leap. While the merchant class historically held a lower standing than the samurai or farmers, they internalized the concept of Michi by adapting it into a commercial ethic. We see a powerful early example in the ancient commercial code practiced by the Omi merchants during the Edo era, we're talking the 1700s, known as Sampo Yoshi.
Sampo Yoshi, which is literally three-way good, right?
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but it fundamentally reorients commercial intent.
It does. This was their foundational commercial creed. A transaction had to be good for the seller, Yoshi, good for the buyer, Yoshi, and critically, good for society.
Good for society.
Yeah.
And this wasn't merely charity tacked onto a profitable venture. It demanded an ethical method of earning wealth in order to use it ethically for the community's benefit. It's a direct mirror of the Bushido emphasis on conscience informing the conduct of life, applied now to commerce.
But wasn't that system vulnerable? I mean, if your competitor is willing to sell a slightly inferior product just for profit, wouldn't the Sampo Yoshi merchant lose out? It sounds great in theory, but does it work in practice?
Well, historically it worked because it built long-term trust and social approval. If the community recognized your business was contributing to its welfare, that business earned powerful protection and enduring loyalty, outlasting the short-term profiteers.
Oh, okay.
And this tradition was formalized in the Meiji era, following the end of the samurai class, by a man named Ichi Shibusawa. He is often called the founder of Japanese capitalism.
Shibusawa's task was essentially integrating the soul of the warrior ethic with the machinery of modern industry. That sounds like a monumental task.
It was. He promoted combining the analects of Confucius and Abacus, believing that business and economy must be fully consistent with moral codes. This perspective was desperately needed because, after the samurai class was dissolved, Japan faced a real risk of drifting into pure materialism. Shibusawa was arguing that business success required moral conduct, that profit without moral purpose was fundamentally unsustainable and corrosive to the nation.
This cultural backdrop helps explain why the Japanese model of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, looks fundamentally different from what we see in Western, especially U.S. capitalism.
Absolutely. In the U.S. model, CSR often focuses heavily on shareholder returns, philanthropy, and sometimes compliance driven by legal mandates. In Japan, CSR is fundamentally management-driven and deeply rooted in the idea of the corporation as a social institution, a key part of a closely connected network known as keiretsu.
Let's pause on Keiretsu. The original script mentioned it briefly as a network. But for a deep dive audience, we really need to understand the architecture, because that architecture dictates why the corporation is viewed as a social institution rather than just an isolated profit machine.
You're right, that's a key point. Keiretsu are these large industrial groupings or business families, often centered around a main bank and a general trading company, and they have key features, like cross-shareholding.
So the companies own shares in each other.
Exactly. Member companies hold shares in each other, which makes them really resistant to external takeover bids and thus insulates them from that constant short-term shareholder pressure. They can prioritize long-term stability, the main bank provides the capital, and the general trading company handles all the global logistics.
So if the companies own each other, the relationship isn't purely transactional. It's more familial, creating this stable, group-oriented ecosystem.
Yes. And the stability afforded by that keiretsu structure allows Japanese companies to value long-term community welfare over immediate shareholder returns. Their historical focus was driven by necessity, things like the devastating environmental pollution from rapid industrialization in the 1960s, and the desire for social approval. If the keiretsu failed society, they risked losing their entire social license to operate.
And this emphasis on deep social integration is reinforced by traditional management styles rooted in Confucian thought promoting wa, or harmony.
That's right. Confucianism reinforced the group-oriented familial business management style, which stands in clear contrast to the individualistic management of Western corporations. This is why we see the seniority-based system remaining so important for so long.
The system that pretty much guarantees lifetime employment and predictable progression.
In many large firms, yeah. Career progression is highly predictable and automatic, with compensation linked strongly to education and seniority. It fosters a deeply paternalistic outlook. The enterprise commits to the employee for life, and the employee commits loyalty to the company.
It's an exclusive and binding commitment.
It really is, treating the company almost like a second family.
And this emphasis on lifetime loyalty and harmony leads directly to that famous Japanese consensus decision-making process.
This is encapsulated in two main concepts, ringi and nemawashi. Now, ringi is the formal authorization procedure. A proposal document literally moves up the hierarchy for seals of approval from department heads, directors, and the president. But the crucial pre-step is nemawashi,
which literally means dealing with the roots of trees.
It's a beautiful metaphor, isn't it? For meticulous subterranean work, nemawashi is the informal consultation process where managers and executives meet individually or in small groups to discuss the proposal and eliminate any potential dissension before the formal submission of the ringi document. The goal is to reach a consensus, or wa, meaning harmony.
But wait. If you eliminate dissension before the formal vote to preserve wa, doesn't that inherently risk stifling innovation? Or worse, sweeping serious unpleasant truths under the rug, especially if the person with the dissenting view is junior or less powerful.
You've just identified the Achilles heel of the system. While the process is notoriously slow, once a decision is adopted on the basis of such extensive discussions, it meets general acceptance, which makes implementation much easier and more efficient because everyone has bought in.
Okay, I can see that.
However, the dark side of nemawashi is that its prioritization of harmony makes it extremely difficult for a critical voice, especially one that challenges the prevailing wisdom or reveals a serious flaw to be heard. The group pressure to conform, to avoid being the dissenter who disrupts wa, can suppress vital information.
So on paper, we have this structure built on integrity, social benefit, loyalty, and harmony. Sounds like the ethical fortress of modern business.
In theory, yes. But that internal moral compass is relentlessly tested when placed under the pressure of global markets, rapid economic downturns, and the unforgiving microscope of modern media and NGOs. The ethical code hits reality, and sometimes the internal pressure to maintain the facade, the harmony overwhelms the commitment to integrity, the conscience.
Let's talk about the key triggers that started eroding public trust and really tested this system. It wasn't just globalization and competition, was it?
No, not at all. It was a combination of forces, starting with the rupture of the bubble economy in the 1990s, which led to job insecurity and the slow demise of that job-for-life salaryman system. The public started feeling betrayed by the institutions they had trusted for decades.
And then the scandals hit.
Oh, yeah. This was exacerbated by a series of devastating corporate scandals involving issues like Sokaya corporate extortionists and widespread food contamination incidents, all of which led to increasing public skepticism about the checks and balances within these companies.
And then the critical societal catalyst, the Kobe earthquake in 1995.
That was a pivotal event. The government proved highly inept and slow in its relief efforts after the massive damage and loss of life. Conversely, the swift, coordinated response by NPOs and NGOs demonstrated their essential value to the public. 1995 is often marked as the first year of volunteerism in Japan.
A real turning point.
It was. Citizen perceptions evolved significantly. Later polls showed that the public increasingly saw NPOs and NGOs as conducting activities that the nation and large corporations were unable to, which vastly increased public demands for corporate social responsibility and transparency.
And this new citizen awareness collided directly with a very old cultural barrier, the Japanese approach to communication, which inherently resists the kind of transparency that's vital for accountability.
This is the crux of the tension. Japanese culture relies on high-context communication, emphasizing nonverbal cues and implicit understanding isshin-denshin, or communication by the heart.
Right.
There's a proverb that sums up the ethos, not to say is better than to say, and the custom of taitmei, the polite facade used to avoid blunt disagreement or offense, is pervasive in business. While this maintains harmony, in daily interactions, it creates a huge difficulty for modern accountability mechanisms like whistleblowing.
Because whistleblowing, by its very nature, is the most aggressive violation of wa. It shatters the consensus and forces internal conflict right out into the open.
Exactly. When problems arise, the cultural instinct is often to manage the optics, control the information flow, and maintain the taitmei, rather than address the root issue transparently and immediately. The fear of causing loss of face, both for oneself and the corporation, is a powerful motivator for a cover-up.
And this brings us directly to the case studies, showing what happens when that moral code collapses under pressure. Let's start with Mitsubishi, a company whose very principles are founded on integrity.
Yes, Mitsubishi's foundation rests on three corporate principles, dating all the way back to 1934. Shokihoko, corporate responsibility to society, Shoji Komei, integrity and fairness, and Ritsugi-oboki, international understanding. These are almost modern applications of the Bushido virtues.
And yet,
Mitsubishi Motors was twice forced to admit systematically covering up vehicle defects, some dating back to 1977.
1977.
It was a catastrophic failure of that Shoji Komei integrity principle. The cover-up involved concealing defects related to failing brakes and fuel leaks, leading to recalls of over 160,000 cars. The fact that the company had mechanisms dating back decades specifically designed to avoid safety disclosures shows a systemic breakdown where the preservation of the corporate image, the taitmei, had been prioritized over public safety and moral conscience.
So the system, designed to preserve long-term trust, ended up sacrificing trust entirely just to maintain a temporary facade of quality.
Precisely. And this structural failure was further highlighted globally by the 1996 sexual harassment lawsuit against Mitsubishi Electric America Foundation. The lawsuit exposed a toxic internal ethical environment, reinforcing the public perception that the ethical conduct within the group structure had collapsed across multiple departments and even continents.
However, we also have an example of Mitsubishi adapting and proving they could engage ethically, right?
Yes, that contrast is crucial. When facing confrontation from the Rainforest Action Network, or RAN, over old-growth timber, Mitsubishi eventually engaged in successful, non-confrontational dialogue with the NGO. This process resulted in concrete agreements to phase out purchases of old-growth paper and timber.
Interesting.
It shows that the corporate group can integrate outside demands and adapt, but often only when the pressure is external and mediated through dialogue rather than internal conflict that challenges us.
That distinction is key. Covering up internal flaws versus responding to external activists. Let's move to Toyota, a company that's synonymous with quality, efficiency, and monozukuri, the manufacturer of value-added products. Their reputation seemed unassailable.
Toyota built an incredible reputation, particularly as a leader in environmental CSR through the Prius and their hybrid synergy drive. This green image gave them significant global influence. However, their commitment to quality, monozukuri, and the underlying ethical structure were severely tested by the global safety crisis around 2010.
The massive worldwide recalls, I remember this, malfunctioning accelerator pedals, braking problems, steering issues, over 8.5 million cars recalled globally.
The fallout was immense. It resulted in fatalities and a massive $16.4 million fine from the U.S. NHTSA. Toyota's president, Akio Toyoda, had to appear and apologize during a U.S. congressional hearing in Washington.
Wow.
That act of apologizing on the global stage, facing the most intense external scrutiny, was a massive loss of face for the company and a symbolic failure of the traditional system.
Looking at the timeline here, how did those ingrained values of Waugh and Tate-May play into this crisis?
What's fascinating is that initially, when accelerator faults surfaced in 2008 and 2009, Toyota management treated the issue as a quality problem, a technical fault, not as an immediate safety problem.
Crucial distinction.
Huge. The focus was on diagnosing the engineering fault, not on public disclosure or immediate recall, because they prioritized maintaining the reputation for quality, monozukuri, and avoiding the panic that a safety crisis announcement would cause. This suggests the deep-seated cultural priority of managing the image, the tetame, trumped immediate, transparent safety disclosure.
So the intense internal pressure to maintain the perfect facade led to a disastrous delay that violated the core Bushido principle, righteousness before everything else. And we saw internal ethical breakdowns here too, beyond just the production line.
We did. The 2006 sexual harassment case against the former CEO of Toyota America required the company to hire a diversity expert to review employment practices and increase training for senior executives. This again shows that while the company excelled in external environmental CSR, the Kiyosei-like elements, the internal ethical mechanisms concerning human capital and integrity were lagging significantly.
And externally, NGOs also saw the inconsistency.
Absolutely. Despite their green reputation, groups like the Freedom from Oil campaign targeted Toyota for simultaneously producing gas-guzzling vehicles like the Tundra. This critique highlighted the inherent conflict between their marketing image and their full product line, forcing them to confront the gap between their stated Kiyosei goal and their actual business portfolio.
Now let's look at Canon, which explicitly defined its ethical mandate under the concept of Kiyosei.
Right. Kiyosei, or living and working together for the common good, is Canon's self-defined answer for a comprehensive Japanese CSR model. It's explicitly focused on achieving harmonious balance and addressing global imbalances, particularly those between rich and poor nations, making it broader than the purely domestic Sampo Yoshi.
And externally, they look great.
They do. Externally, Canon has exemplary CSR programs, sponsoring initiatives like the Canon Envirothon, Canon for Kids, and WWF partnerships. They use their brand image to support environmental and social causes globally.
So, externally, model citizens. But we know the internal picture gets complicated when that traditional management system runs up against modern labor demands.
Very much so. Canon, despite being a stoic proponent of the Japanese management system, meaning they champion the traditional, loyal, paternalistic structure, faced significant lawsuits concerning its temporary workers.
Right.
The lawsuits focused on temporary workers who had been employed for up to 7 years by temp agencies, lacking the benefits and job security of permanent employees.
That's huge moral conflict. They preach loyalty and security, yet they relied on a class of permanent temporary labor that fundamentally undermines the very foundation of loyalty and the paternalistic ethos the Japanese system claims to embody.
It creates a bifurcated workforce. You have the protected core, embodying law and loyalty, and then you have the unprotected periphery, which is necessary for modern flexibility but stands in direct opposition to the old moral code. This internal contradiction is a growing problem across many large Japanese firms clinging to the traditional model while trying to manage costs in a global market.
And this touches on a broader governance issue across Japanese companies, which is transparency and inclusion.
That's the persistent weak point. When evaluating internal ethical policies, one glaring deficiency is the representation of women on boards. It's the lowest globally, at less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Even large, successful companies like Toyota and Canon did not adopt the board committee system, which is designed to increase outside oversight. This reluctance reinforces their adherence to the traditional closed Japanese management system, where executives are reluctant to permit external parties, whether foreign investors, NGOs, or women, to affect the inner workings of their company.
So whether it's the systemic cover-up at Mitsubishi, the delay in safety acknowledgement at Toyota driven by Topmei, or the two-tiered labor structure at Canon, the internal pressure to maintain harmony often overrides the commitment to integrity and transparency demanded by the global market. The old code is struggling to translate into verifiable metrics.
Exactly. The old codes prioritize dignity and sincere intention, but the modern market demands measurable accountability and external transparency. And the way companies communicate about their CSR efforts often fails to bridge this gap, risking distrust.
Let's talk about that communication gap.
Yeah.
The process of publicly communicating CSR activities is fraught with risk because the audience is, highly skeptical.
It is. The public release of CSR information, the moralization of corporate communication, whether it's a simple one-way message or an attempt at symmetric dialogue, it often risks becoming mere symbolic communication or too idealized.
Right.
Companies claim legitimacy, but stakeholders are smart. They know the corporate motives are rarely purely altruistic. If a company claims too much moral high ground, it actually increases skepticism because it conflicts with the known reality of profit generation.
And the media's role has shifted dramatically here, from being a corporate partner to a powerful watchdog, forcing transparency where the cultural code resists it.
The Japanese media historically often serviced the corporation's advertising needs, creating a cozy relationship. But the shift began in the late 1960s, catalyzed notably after a 1969 New York Times article criticized Japanese automakers for their ignorance regarding safety concerns.
An external push.
That external critique triggered a profound reaction. The Japanese media responded by taking up the public interest mandate and began heavily scrutinizing the domestic industry, particularly concerning environmental and safety issues.
So the media shifted from being a servant to a demanding watchdog.
Yes. This meant companies whose activities impinged on safety and environment had no choice but to pay careful attention to public disclosure. Failure to disclose information concerning key areas leads to adverse publicity that damages the company's social standing over the long run, forcing them to prioritize disclosure over the cultural impulse to maintain wa or tatmei.
So where do we go from here? If the old moral code is being challenged by market metrics and the traditional way of communicating is failing to build trust, what is the Japanese CSR outlook? Is it just a slow, painful westernization?
Not necessarily a westernization, but a process of adaptation that retains core cultural identity. The way forward, as seen in concepts like Canon's Kyosei, is to devise a distinctly Japanese version of CSR that retains the cultural strengths, the long-term outlook, the lifetime employment ideals, and the group-oriented approach while adapting to modern demands for accountability and transparency.
And we can see where this adaptation is succeeding today based on the data.
We can. Overall, Japanese companies excel in the environmental and reporting aspects of CSR compared to international peers. This is partly driven by their geographic context. Japan is a resource-poor nation, so environmental consciousness is naturally higher. Over 90% of large Japanese companies have basic environmental policies, placing them on par with Europe and ahead of the U.S. in this area.
And they report a lot.
A lot. The number of CSR-specific reports easily exceeds that of the UK and dwarfs other Asian countries. They are committed to measuring and reporting.
But the persistent weakness remains governance and internal human capital issues.
That's the challenge. They still lag significantly in governance areas like transparency outside directors and gender equal female board members. The traditional system resists sharing control or allowing truly independent oversight. This internal resistance is why the concepts of individualism and independence, which are currently being embraced by the younger generation, are creating immense societal friction.
That's a profound thought. The younger generation's embrace of individualism is directly challenging the seniority and group-based norms that underpin the old corporate system and the WA ethos.
It creates a tremendous generational gap and a search for a new moral system. When feudalism ended in the late 1800s, Bushido was terminated relatively quickly, leaving a spiritual void. Think of the physician Ogata Kia and his quote about conscience. He was living during a period of intense moral uncertainty. Today, as material prosperity is no longer universally satisfying and skepticism about religion is high, there is a search for a renewed moral system in education, a search for a renewed way, amidst, that can balance the inner posture of sincerity with the external demands of the modern world.
That brings us full circle. The Japanese experience in CSR and governance demonstrates the enduring power and the critical vulnerability of that quiet, profound statement we started with, striving for a life that brings no shame to your own conscience.
The deep dive shows that this inner moral compass, this ideal of integrity and sincerity rooted in Michi and the codes of Bushido, is subjected to relentless stress when applied to the pressures of global markets, immediate profits, and competing cultural values. The struggle to genuinely integrate that inner sincerity into large-scale, measurable corporate outcomes defines the ethical challenge of modern Japanese business. They're trying to marry the abacus with the analects once more, but this time under a harsh, unforgiving light of global accountability.